Going. Hello and welcome, everyone, to Deception and IHL. My name is Ben Crawford. I'm a legal fellow here with the IHL team, and I'll be leading today's presentation. As you've likely sleuthed out, today we'll be discussing where international humanitarian law draws the line between lawfully and unlawfully deceptive practices and simulations of armed conflict. In this presentation, I will be providing a broad overview of military deception, identify the major humanitarian legal frameworks applicable to deceit in armed conflicts, which includes deceptive acts, booby traps, and espionage, review some international accountability mechanisms, and if all goes well, have some time for questions at the end. Simply put, the use of deception is an attempt by a military force to gain an advantage in warfare by misleading their adversary in warfare into specific actions or inactions that create favorable combat conditions for the deceiving force. Deceptions can be aimed at influencing strategic, operational, and tactical levels of military decision-making, taking the form of diversions, feints, demonstrations, ruses, displays, and more. Deception has been a fundamentally integral part of warfare across all of human history. Many know of the fabled Trojan horse that brought the Greeks into the city of Troy, of the Battle of Cannae, where Hannibal led a false retreat, crushing a vastly large Roman army in a brutally effective pincer movement, of Operation Bodyguard, where the allies of World War II deceived the Germans into believing that the main invasion target of D-Day would be in Calais rather than Normandy, through fictional armies, false leaked information, misdirections, and other deceptive tactics. Several major deception doctrines include Magruder's principle, which stipulates that it is easier to convince an enemy to hold on to a pre-existing belief than it is to convince an enemy of something it does not already believe. Jones' dilemma, which explains that the greater the number of intelligence and information gathering and transmitting resources available to the target of the deception, the more difficult it is to deceive the target. Conversely, the more of the target's intelligence and information systems that are manipulated in a deception plan or denied to the target, the more likely the target is to believe the deception. Lastly, the avoidance of windfalls. If a deception target obtains deceptive materials too easily, they will believe it is too good to be true and are unlikely to act on the information, leading to the deception's failure. Therefore, deception planners must take care in planting deceptive information in ways that appear to be natural and do not raise the suspicions of their targets. Under international humanitarian law, the major framework for distinguishing between lawful and unlawful deceptions is by determining if an act of deception is a ruse of war or perfidy. Ruses of war are not prohibited. Ruses are acts which are intended to mislead an adversary or induce him to act recklessly, but which infringe no rule of international law applicable in armed conflict and which are not perfidious. Additional Protocol 1 to the Geneva Conventions identifies the use of camouflage, decoys, mock operations, and misinformations as examples of lawful ruses in armed conflict. Additional examples can include acts generally intended to confuse the enemy, ambushes, feigning attacks, retreats, or flights, feigning quiet or inactivity, pretending to communicate with troops that do not exist, sending falsified communications with the intention of allowing them to be intercepted by the enemy, other various forms of disinformation, constructing dummy installations of military forces, making use of the enemy's communications, and false flag operations. However, one caveat with that is that warships and auxiliary vessels who use or fly under false flags are prohibited from launching an attack whilst flying the false flag, and are at all times banned from simulating the status of hospital ships, medical transports, humanitarian vessels, passenger vessels carrying civilian passengers, vessels protected by the UN flag, vessels guaranteed safe conduct by prior agreement, vessels with the emblems of the Geneva Conventions, and vessels engaged in transporting cultural property under this special protection, which I will get a little bit further into as we talk about perfidy. Perfidy. It is prohibited to kill, injure, or capture an adversary by resort to perfidy. Any acts inviting the confidence of an adversary to lead them to believe that they are entitled to or obliged to afford protection under the rules of international law applicable in armed conflict with intent to betray that confidence shall constitute perfidy. In this way, the prohibition on perfidy has four elements: an act inviting particular confidence of the enemy, an intent to betray that confidence, a specific protection provided for in international law, death, injury, or capture of the adversary. Examples of perfidious acts include the feigning of incapacitation by wounds or sickness, feigning of civilian non-combatant status, feigning distress at sea, feigning surrender, disguising a weapons cache as a medical unit, capturing enemy combatants by posing as a medical transport, disguising a troop transport as a UN vehicle, or even infecting enemy combatants with a virus while posing as humanitarian medics. Additionally, there is a range of protections and prohibitions that expand the perfidious framework to specific emblems and identifications in the areas of armed conflict. These include the flag of truce, which is it's prohibited to feign the intent to negotiate under a flag of truce and then carry out an attack or capture or injury, as we've discussed. The emblems of the Geneva Conventions. It is prohibited to make improper use of the distinctive emblems of the Geneva Conventions or other emblems provided for by the Geneva Conventions, such as internationally recognized protective emblems for signs and signals, such as the protective identifications for cultural property in armed conflict. UN emblems and uniforms. It is prohibited to make use of the distinctive emblem of the United Nations except as authorized by that organization. Lastly, we have military identifications. Now, there's an important distinction here between using the military identifications, which may include the flags, military emblems, insignia, and other uniforms of an adversary or a neutral or other state not party to the conflict. For an adverse party to the conflict, improper use of the flags, military emblems, insignia, or uniforms is prohibited for improper use. Improper use includes the use of said military identifications while opening fire on the enemy, while directly attacking them, but not using enemy uniforms to gather information or perform acts of sabotage. Those would be considered proper use. However, for neutral state or other parties not to the conflict, any use of their flags, military emblems, insignia, or uniforms is completely prohibited. Now that we've discussed the major IHL framework for deceptive acts, I'll turn to several other deceptive aspects of armed conflict. First up, we have booby traps. A booby trap means any device or material which is designed, constructed, or adapted to kill or injure, which functions unexpectedly when a person disturbs or approaches an apparently harmless object, performs an apparently safe act. It is prohibited to use booby traps in the form of apparently harmless portable objects, which are specifically designed and constructed to contain explosive material. Further, it is prohibited to use booby traps which are in any way attached to or associated with internationally recognized protective emblems, signs, or signals like the Geneva Convention and the United Nations, as we've just discussed. Sick, wounded, or dead persons, burial or cremation sites or graves, any medical-related items, portable items specifically designed for children, food or drink, kitchen utensils or appliances, except when these utensils or appliances are in military locations, objects of a clearly religious nature, historic monuments, works of art, places of worship that constitute cultural or spiritual heritage of people or animals or their carcasses. Finally, we turn to espionage. Espionage is defined as gathering or attempting to gather information in territory controlled by an adverse party through an act undertaken on false pretenses or deliberately in a clandestine manner. Any member of the armed forces of a party to a conflict who falls into the power of an adverse party while actively engaging in espionage shall not have the right to prisoner of war status and may be treated as a spy. However, a combatant will not be treated as a spy. They were operating while in the uniform of their armed forces. A spy captured in the act of espionage shall not be punished without previous trial. Now, these laws apply to combatants, to members of the armed forces engaging in espionage. There are, in this way, that is why if they are operating within the uniform of their armed forces, they cannot be tried for espionage and therefore are granted their prisoner of war status as they were acting openly and transparently as a combatant. However, if they were not, and say specifically working in a James Bond-esque suit, or perhaps working dressed as an inconspicuous civilian, that would count as espionage. However, if a spy has been captured, or a spy has been discovered committing espionage and is not captured and then returns and rejoins the armed forces of their party to the conflict, and then is captured, then they may not be treated as a spy as they have rejoined their armed forces. They have gotten past the county line, so to speak. So it is an important distinction that espionage and the lack of protection afforded to spies who are caught in the act of committing espionage is a very high and specific standard for losing those combatant protections. An additional factor in espionage is use of parlementaires, which admittedly are less common in today's world, but a parlementaire is one who has been authorized by a party to the conflict to enter into communication with the other who advances bearing a white flag, which, as we know from previous slides, it is impermissible to use a white flag to enter into truces or temporary armistice with the intent of negotiating or surrender, and then using that to lure the enemy in to attack. Parlementaires and their accompaniment have the right to inviolability and are protected from attack or capture. Parlementaires who take advantage of their privileged position to commit acts detrimental to the other party lose their inviolability and can be held prisoner, tried, and punished under the laws of the power within whose party they are under. Detrimental acts can include the collecting of information, carrying out acts of sabotage, inducing soldiers to collaborate in collecting intelligence, instigating soldiers to shirk their duty or desert, and organizing espionage in the territory of the adverse party. You see, now, while they are less seen in today's practical reality, the laws of international humanitarian law, including the some of the Geneva Conventions, customary international law, and the Hague regulations still contain protections for parlementaires, though their use has declined substantially in recent years. Now we come to cyber ruses, which I wanted to draw special attention to. Modern technology permits a vast array of deceptions to be attempted, but it also allows for far greater intelligence and information gathering than ever before, as technology continues to advance and develop. Right? For example, every image incorporated into this slide deck was generated with artificial intelligence. As things stand, disinformation and other deceptions promulgated via modern technology are still generally considered to be lawful ruses of war, with such examples as the creation of a dummy computer system simulating non-existent forces, the transmission of false information causing an opponent erroneously to believe operations are about to occur or are underway, the use of false identifiers or computer networks, what is known as honeypots, or computer transmissions, feigned cyber attacks, bogus orders purporting to have been issued by the enemy commander, psychological warfare activities, transmitting false intelligence intended for interception, and the use of enemy codes, signals, and passwords. Now you see that this is very similar to some of the examples we discussed of valid ruses of war on the ground that were codified into law when they were coming in the medium of telegrams and ciphers and radio signals, and things have, as technology has grown, so the opportunities for ruses grown, but the legal framework still applies. That being said, it is possible for perfidious deceptions to exist under modern technology. For example, an email that's sent to an adversary detailing the time and place of a false surrender that then lures the adversary into a deadly ambush would be considered perfidy. But it is necessary for cyber deceptions to be the proximate cause of injury. So if on the drive to that so-called surrender, the adverse party drives over a series of mines and their transport explodes, that would not be a perfidious act because the email that was sent was not the proximate cause of that death or serious injury of those enemy combatants. However, as technology continues to progress, it is likely that it will be increasingly possible for cyber-based deceptions to be the proximate cause of death or injury of an adversary in a wider range of circumstances. Examples include deceiving a pacemaker company and hacking it to, and hacking their devices for, to cause them to stop, posing as a routine software update for their pacemaker's computer chip. As technology gets advanced, we move beyond the stars. Phishing requests that look like valid software updates that shut off the oxygen on a space shuttle, and many and more examples as technology and the human race continues to advance. These circumstances, it is careful to look at the existing laws of war provided to ruses of war and perfidy to see if they still match the standard, and if the as deceptions get more and more advanced and at times indistinguishable, that they are essentially blur the line between a ruse and perfidy in this way. Now to accountability. Under the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, the following acts are considered war crimes under Article 8. Making improper use of a flag of truce, the flag or of the military insignia and uniform of the enemy or the United Nations, as well as the distinctive emblems of the Geneva Conventions, resulting in death or serious personal injury. You see in one prompt, they combine the vast majority of the protective emblems doctrine to one prompt. Killing or wounding treacherously individuals belonging to the hostile nation or army, which applies generally to perfidious acts large. And lastly, declaring abolished, suspended, or inadmissible in a court of law the rights and actions of nationals of the hostile party. This comes into play if one is caught in the midst of espionage and is given a sham trial. It is not fully afforded the rights and protections afforded to them in a court of law under the proper law of the hostile party that has captured the combatant committing espionage. Now, a note that all of these prompts, while they are under Article 8, are considered war crimes, they're also applicable exclusively to international armed conflicts, as are many of the prompts and framework that I have discussed today. Well, it is applicable to non-international armed conflicts via customary international law. It is important to note that as discussed on my cyber slide, as technology continues to advance, it is more and more possible for non-state armed groups and de facto authorities in non-international armed conflicts to engage in cyber warfare and grand deception in a way that was not as thought of when the provisions of the Geneva Conventions and the additional protocols were created. There's something to look at. And with that, that is the end of my full presentation. Thank you very much for watching.